So welcome back, everyone. This panel, as was introduced already, will look at the European level, and we will have 4 speakers, and we are going on until 5 to 1. If you want to ask questions, please use the Q&A window. And so we will be focusing on how the experience and the knowledge we acquire with this project can be brought at the European level. And so we will focus on the European education area. We will have somebody from the Commission to tell us all about it. But first, I will leave the word to MEP Monica Silvana Gonzalez, that will talk to us about the role of the European Parliament in supporting inclusive education and the European education area. So, Monica, the floor is yours.
Okay. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, we can.
Okay, perfect. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for your invitation to participate in this important panel promoting positive attitude and evidence-based policy for inclusive education. Thank you, Rachel Bauham from European Association of Service Providers for Persons with Disability. Sorry, because I am beginning in English, but I will try to do my best. I think the education inclusion is a path that all people in the education community, students, family, teachers, and professors have to work together. All ideas are work to build this path. It is a long way. It is a path where we need the good idea, the intelligence, the will, and the imagination of all the people in the education community. I defend that all persons or people in the education community speak to achieve a change. I defend so in Spain when I had the honor of representative of people of Madrid in the regional assembly, Assembleia Madrid, and I continue doing it now in the European Parliament. I celebrate that in Spain, with the approval of the new education law, the government is taking steps forward. The change proposed in the new law has to achieve for inclusion in school, institute, and the other place of education. For that, each student must have all the support they need for a quality education that help them participate in society and overcome barriers. Also, having into account the new challenges COVID-19 has posed to people with disability and the education community. All is mandated by the International Convention on the Right of Persons with Disability, so that's the United Nations. Taking a self-critical position, politics often neglect the education for people with disability. For this reason, we need commitment deputies and also promote the people with disability themselves do representative themselves or are electing in legislative bodies. We need more people with disability in this parliament. I think families must be able to choose the education for their minor children, also those with disability. There is one better than family to decide. Right now in Spain, I believe that a new era is opening in inclusive education, but the world requires the commitment of the autonomous government, no? The regional government. In the field of European competence, which, as we know, the education matter, are very limited. Europe has been working for years, for example, with the Erasmus Plus program that so many people have already benefited, both in vocational and university trainees. Since the representative of the Erasmus Plus 2021-2027 program, it was being taken into account as one of the main actions. Make this more inclusive. To do this, in the file represented by the commissioner that last May 31, 2 years ago, 2018, the following measure will propose it. Better outreach among disadvantaged people through new formats such as virtual exchange and shortened learning period abroad, create more opportunities for school students to learn abroad and get to know the students from different countries, including through the winning the largest network of the teacher of the world, that develop projects and virtual exchange. In this same document, actions were also proposed to make it more accessible. Open the program, the smaller and grassroots organization, so that participants can establish partnerships, creating shortage projects that involve smaller sum and money and simpler administrative requirements. Reduce the administrative burden for the benefits, for example, with application for simple online. Objectives of the Erasmus program. Among the specific objectives of the Erasmus Plus program, we also find that there are promote the education mobility of persons, as well as cooperation, inclusion, excellence, creativity, and innovation at the level of organization and policies in the field of education and training. Promote not formal education mobility and active participation among young people. Promote the education mobility of coaching and sport personnel, as well as cooperation, inclusion, creative, and innovation at the level of sport organizations and sport policies. Keys to the Erasmus Plus program. Within the K Action 2, promoting between organization and institution, and 3, support for the development of cooperation policy within Chapter 2, Education and Trainee, 3, Young. We also find the values of inclusion present. 3K, Action 2, cooperation between the organization and institution in the field of education and trainee, even the young and sport chapter. The program will support the following action with K Action 2. Association for cooperation and exchange of practice, in particular association on a small scale, to promote broader and more inclusive access to the program. We think the necessary measure for the qualitative and inclusive execution of the program. In addition, the Jean Monnet action support various institutes that pursue objectives of interest European, such as the European Agency for the Development of the Education of People with Need, Special Education and Education Inclusion of Odense. And the Parliament was pronounced through a legislative resolution last 28th of March, the last years in 2019. At the end of the last legislature, with at several points, he stressed that the program should have a more inclusive character, for which it has to promote the participation rate of people with further opportunities. In addition, the Parliament incorporates inclusion strategy into the text as Article 13 by Amendment 117, where is as fair. By 31 March 2020, the Commission shall develop a framework of inclusion measure as well as the guideline for each application, building on the framework and paying particular attention to a specific problem of access to program in the national context, national agency development, and multi-years national inclusion strategy. That strategy will be published no later than in June 2021. And this application will be subject to periodic monitoring. The framework and strategy provide for paragraph 1 shall pay particular attention into the following elements: the cooperation with the social partners, local and national authority and civil society, support to local grassroots organizations that work directly with group recipients, dissemination and communication to target group, in particular through the dissemination of user-friendly information, simplification of application products, very important simplification for application product. The provision of specific advisor, trainer, and support service to group recipients, but before submit the application and the preparation for the effective participation in the program. We understand from the European Parliament, we must include indicators to be quantified. Therefore, they request a series of indications in relation to inclusion. Number of people with favored opportunity who participate in mobility action and activity, number of people with favored opportunity using virtual learning tool or joint venture in support of mobility under the program, number of people with favored opportunity using virtual learn tools or mixer because they cannot participate in mobility activities, number of organizations new to the program that benefits from its support under K Action 1 and Case Action 2. A percentage of people with favored opportunity. We understand the European Parliament, we must include in these indicators to be quantified the effective of program. Thank you very much again for having examined me for this closing ceremony and for counting on the continuum with me and my team of my office to advance in this long path in inclusive education. Thank you so much and continue on working together.
Thanks a lot, Monica, for giving us some information about Spain and also for letting us know that you can be an ally in making Erasmus Plus more inclusive. Now we are moving to what was supposed to be our first speaker from the European Commission. It is Michael Teutsch, the head of the School Education Unit of Directorate General on Education, Youth, Sport and Culture. And he will let us know everything about the European education area that has been published on 30th September and that aims to include, to ensure that all young people living in Europe are able to benefit from high quality education and training, and of course, how these can be inclusive to persons with disabilities. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Irene, and good morning to everybody. And thank you so much for the invitation for the seminar. Very happy to meet you here. Well, I will try to sort of set out, as has just been said, the elements which are relevant for our future education strategy and the way that we support member states and regions and cities in moving ahead on these issues. And we've just heard, in a way, it fits quite nice what the Member of Parliament just said, because very basically we have, if you want, two broad ways of working together in the European Union to support countries. On the one hand, we of course do the policy cooperation, so we try to identify what is good practice and to support learning from each other. So that's one of the main issue of work. And secondly, we also use our program, and notably the Erasmus program that has just been addressed and has just been presented, in order to make people mobile, move, and everybody move, and also to exchange good practices there. Because in Erasmus, of course, we make people move, but we also have the objective of making teachers move, and also there again, in order to learn from each other. And we have plenty of projects where teachers, authorities, stakeholders work together with particular pedagogical challenges. And one of the challenges, of course, also to make education systems more inclusive, including for the issues of disability. I should, however, mention also a third area, which is quite important, and particularly financially, which is the European other funding mechanisms, the European Social Fund, for example, which provides actually quite a lot of money for important national reforms to be rolled out. I mention it simply because it is very important in some countries to reform education systems, and in terms of financial budget, it is quite important, of course, and much more significant to support national reforms. So to recap, policy cooperation, learn from each other, Erasmus for mobility and international exchanges, and also learning from each other. And thirdly, the structural funds in order to support national reforms. And the funding instruments, of course, they are linked. All the three elements are linked, because, of course, in the funding instruments, we provide priorities on the type of funding that is there. And these priorities, they come from policy objectives. And this is why the communication that the European Commission has just adopted on the 30th of September sets out the main policy objectives on what we want to do to work together in Europe, to learn together, but also which will be funding priorities for the sort of the thematic priorities for the funding instruments that we have. So that the three are linked. I just wanted you to mention this. I mean, what's interesting from your point of view in the discussions is that in the European education area, we have the idea that every person, every institution should have the possibility to move around and to exchange experiences. But there's a very clear idea also that this should not just be mobility of anything, but it is a certain type of education, a certain vision that we have in common, where the idea is to have high quality education, innovation, and inclusion. That's the vision that we have for this European education area. So there is an idea of certain type and quality of education to be promoted. And if you look at the communication that the Commission adopted at the end of September, you will see that inclusion is one of the 6 main priorities that has been identified as one of the 6 challenges to be addressed, and as also one of the 6 areas where the Commission says we're going to take action here. What's interesting there, the first thing is that there is inclusion together with gender equality mentioned as a particular challenge to be addressed. That's not so new. We've actually always had this. What is quite interesting, however, from your point of view, is that there is a specific reference to the importance of implementing the objectives of the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. We haven't had this before. We were talking about inclusion more generally speaking, and we can maybe also see afterwards in the discussion, I mean, there is, of course, you cannot link the one with the others. We want a generally more inclusive education system which is inclusive for everybody, whatever their background is. But I think this reference to the UN Convention is quite a signal, because it is true that what I've at least witnessed a bit in last years, there's always a risk if you talk about inclusion more generally speaking, that you quite become a bit weaker, let's say, in terms of addressing the general and the specific knowledge that there already is on the right on policies for people with disabilities. And let's also not forget, it's not just something, it's a right of those people, because I mean that's quite important. If we talk here about the UN Convention, that's sort of, if it's ratified, that's national legislation applicable in all member states. So it's not just a nice idea and an objective, it's something which has to be done, and it's not something that people with disability have to ask for as a favor. They have a right to do it. So I think that's something to actually do it is quite important. And to also, it's a way we go. It was just discussed in the workshop just before the plenary here, that it's a process, of course. But I mean, it needs a lot of work of teacher training, practices, and so on. But I think it's I think quite good and quite I think for your organization also. I'm curious to hear, of course, but I guess you can be pleased to hear that in the overall objectives of promoting inclusion, there is this specific objective being mentioned. And by the way, also, I mean, you know, perhaps that today we have the Education Summit that is going on here in parallel to your seminar. And in the opening speech this morning, Commission Vice President Margaritis Skimas specifically also referred to working with and the rights of people with disabilities for an inclusive education system as one of the objectives for further work. So it's also in our political leadership, this is clearly recognized. So what's going to happen in practice? We are still working on it, I must say. You know, perhaps also that the European Disability Strategy is just under development now. I mean, it should be developed. There was one for the last 10 years, and there will be a new one for the period 2021 to 2030. That's going to be adopted early in 2021. We are still preparing this. But I think in terms of so the concrete ones, I cannot sort of disclose too much here yet. Just to know that in the work that we announced on inclusive, on making the whole education systems more inclusive, I mean, this dimension will be looked at. We will, for example, in my team, we are currently setting up work on what we call pathways to school success, and the work-specific expert group looking at people and the chances of people with particular disadvantages. And we are just discussing internally, I mean, which are the particular target groups to consider in this work. The second one, I would just like to emphasize what the Member of Parliament has already just said. It's a new item in the Erasmus program, which we hope will be coming to force very quickly as of next year, that we really ask from all national agencies implementing the program specific inclusion strategies for next year. And I mean, I've last year been at seminars and conferences with the national agencies, and frankly speaking, I was quite impressed what is there already. There's financial support available, there is information available, and actually there are some colleagues in the national agencies which really reach out to people, ask for needs, and are very flexible as well in terms of how to use the financial possibilities that are available there in order to give them to the disposal of people with disability in case there is sort of some needed, whatever it is, in terms of equipment, in terms of accompanying persons. That is always possible as now. So this is really something we are working very closely with the national agencies at the moment. And I think it's also actually quite important to say, okay, what's possible in terms of finance, but also to reach out and to make the possibilities aware, because some of the worst is that can happen if the people don't really apply for it. And I must say we have plenty of good practices on how this is possible, and we're very happy to continue working on this. Okay, I'll stop here. I think, thank you very much again. And of course, in case there's question, very happy to make a contribution.
Thanks a lot for this very comprehensive presentation. I would take up, that it's very interesting and important also to use ESF and ESF Plus to impulse national reforms towards inclusive education. And it's also reassuring to see that the European education area does mention the inclusion of persons with disabilities and the CRPD. And let's look forward to a disability strategy that also prioritizes inclusive education. Our next speaker is someone that might be familiar to a lot of you, because he's the director of Inclusion Europe, which is one of the project partners of this project. As you probably know, Inclusion Europe does represent persons with intellectual disabilities in Europe that are one of the groups that are the most excluded from mainstream education and education. So, welcome, Milan. I would like to ask you, according to the knowledge that you gathered through this project and also in your daily work, how do you think that EU and the European education area can support the implementation of the UNCRPD and inclusive education? And what do you think that are the elements that are needed for it to be successful? Thanks a lot.
Well, thank you. Hello, everyone. Thanks for the introduction and for the opportunity to contribute to this seminar. That's, of course, a rather broad and complex question, and I'm trying to answer it. Let me perhaps start by with a quote by the founder of modern pedagogy, Comenius, who said that education is the manufacturer of humanity. And that, to me, is the essence of inclusive education, essentially. It's about preparing people for life, to be members of society, to be ready to lead independent life, included in the community. And that is what should guide any actions regarding education, either at national or at European level. And in that respect, of course, it's good to see the positive developments outlined in the European education area, as just the speaker ahead of me was describing them. I mean, the specific mentions of disability and then the implementation, let's say, of the principles of CRPDs is, of course, a very important positive development, as are other specific, as are other aspects of the education area that specifically target disability issues. I would still think that this would need ideally to be much more specific given the situation of people with disabilities in general. Just to give a couple of some numbers to illustrate that situation is, and I will focus on tertiary education, and most of the discussions, let's say, about inclusive education are a lot about primary education. So I will, for once, focus on other areas. One of the main negative, let's say, is the high level of school leavers among people with disabilities, which is the proportion is much higher than in general population. And there is also only 29% of people with disabilities who have tertiary education. compared to 44% of the general population. So these are clearly some indication of still a large disadvantage discrimination, let's say room for improvement and focus. And then I think some basic indicators of where the focus should be in the next couple of years, for example, also for the education area. So it's obviously about, from EU level, about inclusiveness of initiatives such as the Erasmus exchange program, but also, on the other hand, the Comenius exchange program for younger students and pupils of schools. It's also another area where the inclusiveness would need to be approved. But it also means bigger inclusiveness of research and, let's say, the overall policy work about education. So it's not only about people with disabilities being the recipients of education, the benefactors of the policies, but also those who shape those policies, who shape the research and contribute to the research that informs the actions and the policies in education. And there's definitely something that from the EU level can be influenced much more. So that I think is, let's say, a broad overview of a very broad question. Then, of course, in more practical terms, one of the pretty obvious areas for action for the EU would be, let's go for the word improve inclusiveness of European schools, which are famously non-inclusive of children with disabilities. And that, of course, is a great shame for the European Union. So, and that's, to me, is just to illustrate, I was trying to provide some ideas and examples for, let's say, the legislative and policy work, but then also there is a work in the more practical, direct, let's say, impact on people's lives, such as the European schools. I think one last thing I would add that this is going then closer to the recommendations that are one of the outcomes of the IE Plus project, and I recommend everybody to have a look at them because they, of course, cover in more detail and specificity what I am trying to express here. One of those areas is also about, let's say, the general approach, the attitudes, the public, and yeah, I'd say the general attitude, not only of public and how they perceive students with disabilities and their education, but also attitudes of public authorities and education providers. And that's something that in the terms how that translates into general policy would need, I think, much more practical exploration through research and through conversation, because we can see in many countries there's what I would call a backlash against inclusion going on. It was recently covered in some media how this transpires, let's say, in some Central and Eastern European countries. I think that might be something as another area for focus and attention, how this translates into practical real life repercussions for students with disabilities and their parents. And I think what really last thing, I think it's very important that inclusive education is always perceived through all the various groups that are affected by it. So, for example, for us as Inclusion Europe, when we talk about inclusive education, we try to increasingly far from ideal at this stage, but bring in the, let's say, the other groups of students affected by this, like Roma students, and others, because it is essentially about the same thing, trying to make the mainstream education accessible and properly inclusive for every child. So thank you very much. Tried to tackle your complex question, Irene, and I hope I provided you with some useful answers. Thank you.
Yes, yes, you did for sure, Milan. Thanks a lot. Thanks for the very inspiring quotes and for your hints about some priorities for the future in Europe, such as tackle the problem of school leaving, the inclusiveness of European school, and the general lack of awareness that should be tackled throughout the different actors involved in education. So now we are ready to move to our last speaker, but not least. We are moving now to the national level again. So we have Clara Alibert, who is French, and represent UNAPEI, which is the biggest associative movement in France, with over 500 associations facilitated by volunteers, parents, and friends of persons with disabilities in France. Clara, I would like you to talk to us about, of course, the situation of inclusive education in your country, in France, and also to hear about your advice on how to support the realization of inclusive education at EU level. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Irene. I will try to share my screen for the presentation. Okay. Yeah. So hello, everyone. Thank you again, EISPD, Irene, for your invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. And today I'm going to talk about a collective campaign called in French, J'ai pas école, what we could translate in English as No School for Me. So really shortly, because Irene talked about it, UNAPEI is a French organization working with and for persons with intellectual disabilities and their families in France. We are more than 500 associations, and we work to promote and to promote the respect of disability rights in France. And one of our work is about the right to education. So about the context of this campaign, at the beginning of the year, the French president, Emmanuel Macron, said that there will be 0 child without a schooling solution at the beginning of the school year in September. So September happened, and even with the COVID-19 crisis, all the pupils in France were able to return to school. But unfortunately, once again this year, not all of them, because again, thousands of children and adolescents with disabilities cannot continue their schooling or start a schooling. That's why we decided to relaunch an advocacy campaign, this advocacy campaign, No School for Me, for the second year, consecutive year, with a clear ambition to reveal the scandal and to denounce this violation of the right to education. So there is a dedicated website that you can see here. And the objective is that parents, children, adolescents, but also professionals can testify on it and talk about this exclusion. So in this website, you can testify, but you can also read all the testimonies. You can select, for example, a French department, also an age group or a situation, because there is a very different situation. Sometimes it's a total lack of schooling, but sometimes it's a part-time schooling or an inadequate schooling. So for now, we have more than 584 testimonies, and each one of them make visible the realities suffered by families and by children and adolescents in France. But as we said in our website, France is no exception, and this reality of exclusion can be seen in a lot of European countries. That's why for us, it was important, the European level mobilization is really important. And as I said, it's a collective campaign because we received the support of 24 partners, and this year we have received the support of 4 new partners, European partners, IASPD, Inclusion Europe, COFACE Families Europe, and Autism Europe. And so together we work all together a coordinated action toward public opinion, for example, with communication action, but also toward public decision makers. And we wrote several letters, one to commissioners, Commissioner for Education, Commissioner for Equality, and Commissioner for Jobs, and also another letter to the French president. So regarding the letters to commissioners, we advocate for a lot of recommendations. We want the European institution to foster collection of comprehensive data on inclusive education, including, of course, learners with disabilities. We want also the EU to mainstream inclusive education, to facilitate the exchange of policies and practices among countries and stakeholders, but also to improve the accessibility of educational programs such as Erasmus+, that some of you have talked before. Also, of course, the EU to develop a clear policy framework and relevant legislation, to promote the use of EU funds, and to improve the inclusiveness of European schools. And finally, about our collective action towards the President, Emmanuel Macron, we wrote a letter and we call on the government and the President to put the subject of inclusive education on the agenda of the French presidency of the Council of the European Union in 2022. We strongly believe that it could be a great opportunity for the EU to reaffirm its commitment to a more fair, a more united, and a more inclusive Europe, and also to position France as a guardian of these values, of these issues. And we hope that countries will be able to discuss with stakeholders and to move forward a real partnership to achieve this inclusive education in all Europe. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Clara. It was very interesting and touching to hear about your campaign in France, and also very inspirational to hear about the joint letter that you promoted and was signed by different EU networks. And I agree that the points that are raised are ambitious, but are really important. For example, data collection, mainstreaming the education, and creating clear policy framework with appropriate funding are really very, very important to deliver a change in this sense. I saw in the chat that there are a few questions to our panelists. One, we really are short in time, but we can still take a little bit to try to answer them. One is in between a question and a provocation. Do you feel that the UNCRPD is not viewed as a law by member state, but rather as an option? I have an idea on that, but if anyone wants to answer that, you are welcome. I will just read all the other questions. There is one addressing Mr. Teutsch about asking more concrete information about the new Erasmus Plus program starting from 2021. Yeah, and I think that's it. So if there is, maybe we can start with Michael, and you can also try to answer both questions if you want, and then we can have another person answering the first question.
Yes, hello. Thank you for the question. And I mean, on the program, I mean, first of all, that the program should be more inclusive is part of the program objectives that is being said in the legal basis. And one of the things that we are doing now concretely also to implement it is to work on these inclusion strategies with the national agencies who are the experts for implementing sort of the program. I think this is not political anymore, it's pragmatic, but I think that's what we need. I mean, we need those people who are in contact with the beneficiaries, with the applicants, to find out really to what are the needs and how the program can help in order to actually make, for example, mobility and access to the program available to everybody. As I said already, nowadays there's quite many possibilities there in terms of funding. As I said, an accompanying person if that was necessary for any reasons. I mean, some medical equipment can be provided. We have really great projects also with schools who have many students, pupils with special education needs who are doing fantastic work. I mean, so if they are part of an inclusive class setting, even then they just have to come along with the others. If you have a greater number, then also there's provisions there. So we are now basically asking from all national agencies to have strategies for that. It's not only done as an ad hoc basis, but they are prepared for any such cases. As I said, it concerns all students with a certain disadvantaged background, and I think it's also part of the communication aspect we have. I think at the very start also there was an issue about access of organizations. I should also like to mention that we have now new formats that we call small-scale partnerships, which should also make it easier for smaller organizations to access the program in a simpler way, which is something which the Member of Parliament has, I think, mentioned in her intervention at the very start, which is good, so that the big organizations can participate as much as smaller local organizations who would just try it out.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for this information, for this additional information. Is there anyone of the panelists who wants to answer the question about the CRPD? So I repeat the question, is it about the fact that the CRPD is a legal obligation, in fact, but it's not necessarily taken as such by the member states? And I would invite maybe Milan, as he was also focusing on the implementation of the CRPD, to answer this, if you are comfortable.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, it is about the fact that the question is about the fact that the member states might not be taking too seriously the CRPD and consider it more of an option than a real legal obligation. And the question came from Miguel, who is also a panelist, so he can also complete eventually it. Yeah. So Miguel.
You give me very nice questions today.
Sorry.
No, it's a good one, but of course, again, very complicated. I've tried to have perhaps two brief sort of answers or maybe suggestions how to deal with that more than answers. Well, it's obvious that not everyone takes that seriously as a legal instrument, and also when they do take it seriously, they find a lot of excuses why still not to do anything actually based on that legal framework. Well, I think first thing that needs to be done about that is clearly more campaigning and more advocacy work based on people's lives and people's stories and the damage that is done to people when their rights are not respected. Clara spoke about UNAPE's work in this respect, and that is one clear example how this can be and possibly in my view should be done. It needs to be communicated in a clear, person-based way, so that people can make a clear connection between the abstract CRPD or whatever else it may be and the actual impact on children, students that disrespecting their rights actually has. I think that the other part of what I would add to it is I think there is a big way for all of us, the disability, other organizations, advocacy groups, in trying and being much more specific, clear, relatable, understandable to general population, so that we, and by general population I mean basically everybody out of our own office, so that we clearly communicate and support people in that respect. So we don't rely on, let's say, a repetition of language or arguments that we clearly see are not making much progress because they may be too vague for many to make a clear distinction. And maybe to close and illustrate what I'm trying to say is a story from Czechia from about 3 months ago. There were regional election or Senate election, whatever, some elections. And as I said, there is a sort of a backlash against inclusive education in some countries. This one would be one of them. And some of the not insignificant parties feel that going against inclusive education is a good way of attracting quite interesting voter results. And what happened was one bus driver in one of the regional cities came to work one day and found a poster on his bus saying, "Healthy education without inclusion." So, and that was a poster for one of the candidates, and the driver has a quite severely disabled daughter, and he took it personally, and he refused to drive that bus, and he communicated clearly, and it was a huge story in Czech media. I don't think there is any media outlet that didn't cover it, and I think that bus driver did more to communicate the merits of inclusive education and how refusing inclusive education harms children and harms families. Perhaps did more in those couple of days than many of us manage in a very long time. So I'm using that as an illustration of this needs to be possibly communicated in a very clear language based on how it really impacts people and in their daily lives and in their future if they are not provided with proper education.
Thanks a lot, Milan. And so we are taking also this suggestion about raising awareness in using ways that really catch the attention of the media and of society about what is a very bad discrimination towards persons with disabilities. I think that we can close this session now. I would thank a lot all the panelists for their contributions and words. And I would leave the word to Rachel for her conclusive remarks. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much to all of our panelists in that final session. It's very interesting to hear from all of you. Thank you to all of our participants who have joined us today, starting from 10 a.m. when we looked at co-production, and we heard from the school in Madrid about how they work together for inclusion during our parallel sessions, looking at the Quality of Life Index for inclusive education, and the experiences of our training sessions in Bulgaria and Portugal, Belgium and Greece, and also for this policy panel. We've seen today that there's a long way to go for inclusive education, but it is possible, it is realizable, and it's the way that it should be for all learners, including those with intellectual disabilities. We hope that the IE Plus project is able to contribute to the realization of inclusive education, and our deliverables and the tools and information that we have collected over the last 3 years will be available to you both on the IE Plus website, and also we'll send an email with some further information after this event. So thank you to the partners who've been a part of this project. Thank you to our speakers today and the participants. And I hope together we can work for more inclusive education systems across Europe and beyond. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you so much, all team of, thank you, Rachel Bawa. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for joining us, Monica. It's very good to know that we have your support and you're joining us on this. Thank you.
Continue together.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Okay.
Bye-bye.